both sides today, as our authors will explain to you. So with that in mind, Callie, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Hello, I'm Callie Taylor, also known as CL Taylor. I'm the author of 7 psychological thrillers, including Sleep, which came out last year, which was a Richard and Judy book club read, and Strangers, which came out on the 2nd of April in hardback. And I'll just get a quick plug in. It's 99p in the Kindle sale this month, so you can get a bargain there.
Brilliant. And David?
Hello, I'm David Blake. I write crime thrillers based in Norfolk. That's the first book that came out this time last year, and I've since written 3 more. There's the second one, the third one, and the 4th one that came out about 2 months ago. And I'm working on the 5th at the moment, which is going to be called Horsey Mare, which should be out in the summer.
Brilliant, thank you. And Stuart?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Stuart Gibbon. My background's in policing originally. From a very young age, I went to London and joined the Metropolitan Police. Had a fairly lengthy career in the police service. A few years ago, I left the police, and I'm now kind of doing lots of things. One of the things I concentrate on is helping writers to make sure that their content is kind of authentic. So police procedure information, so that if somebody picks a book up and reads it, they don't have that horrible kind of moment where decide not to read any further. I've also, in the last couple of years, been involved with a crime historian called Stephen Wade, and we've written a couple of books. One's called The Crime Writer's Casebook, and the other one is called Being a Detective. They're both really for crime fans. There's lots of information, both historical and contemporary, for crime readers, but also hopefully they'll help crime writers as well.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we are going to talk a little about constructing a novel, and then at the end we are going to have some questions. So if anybody wants to pop a question in the chat for any or all of our authors, feel free. So the first thing I want to ask is, obviously we're living in uncertain times at the moment, very unusual circumstances. How are you all? Callie?
Yeah, I'm okay. For me, life isn't hugely different to normal because obviously this is my study. I spend most of my time here anyway. But I do have an 8-year-old son and a partner, and I'm normally doing the school run first thing in the morning, then coming home to a nice quiet house, just me and the dog, and then I'll get on with some writing for about 6 hours and then do the school run again. Now my day starts with a bit of homeschooling. So today I was doing fractions and decimals, which was fun. And then I have to fit in all of my then I have to fit in all of my admin sort of stuff. And then I probably get about 4 hours a day now to write. I come up here, put headphones on, block everything out. My partner takes over the homeschooling because my partner's working downstairs. And yeah, so it's different. But obviously my tour was cancelled for Strangers. I was supposed to be going to Edinburgh, Newcastle, Durham, Leeds, Liverpool, London, Bristol, where I am. All of that's gone. So promoting Strangers when it came out was tricky. I had to do lots of online stuff, phone interviews with radio stations instead of going there in person. But, you know, you adapt. And writing's been tricky. I know a lot of writers have found it difficult to find the headspace to write. But I think I've got into a routine now, and the words are starting to come back, so that's good.
That's good. And David, how are you?
Yeah, good. Life hasn't really changed. I probably get more sleep because the kids don't go to school, so we don't have to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning anymore. So I get more sleep, which is good, which is proving useful. But my day continues as normal. I write upstairs in my home office. I come down, I spend more time with the family, which is good. I take myself out for a walk once a day, which is good. But apart from that, nothing's changed.
Okay, and Stuart, how are you?
All right, thanks. Thank you for asking. I'm a bit, I must admit, I get a bit up and down. I think we all do, don't we? I have good days, and then I have days where I think, oh, I want to do something different today. But like Callie and David, I spend a lot of time in one of my rooms, which is an office. So I work on a computer quite a lot. That hasn't really changed. But what I'm finding is I'm getting a bit lazy. I'm thinking, well, I've got loads of time to do this now. I haven't really got so much of a deadline anymore. So I'm putting things off a lot. So I've become a little bit more lazy. And I think one of the things I miss more than anything is just being able to go out a bit more often, because I love going out walking and things. And so that one walk a day at the minute is like a golden nugget for me. So it'd be nice when I wanted to do it to just get out and nip round and have a walk somewhere. But other than that, like Callie says, you adapt to it, you make the best of it, and you look forward to the times whenever they might be when things look better.
Well, good to hear that you're all okay and finding your own some unusual routines, but I'm guessing a lot of people are finding a bit more time to be lazy, a bit more time to sleep, and a bit more time to wind down. I know Kelly's had a particularly manic week, but definitely kept busy. So one of the things I wanted to know is, when did you want to know if there was a book in you? Obviously, you've all had different backgrounds leading you up to this, and we're looking at it from a fiction and a non-fiction point of view. So when did you really know that writing a book was something that you really wanted to do, Callie?
I've wanted to be a author since I was 8. So I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if it's me. I've wanted to be an author since I was 8, and I actually sent one of the first books that I wrote to Ladybird Publishers and got my first rejection aged 8. Tried again a few more times until I was about 11, and then I gave up. And I just thought, people like me don't become authors. And then I pretty much gave up until I was about 33. I'd been writing a few short stories and sending them into women's magazines and a few competitions and that sort of thing. And I'd always said to myself, one day I'm going to write a novel. But I kept putting it off because, it's such a big endeavor. And even though I was like a huge reader, loved reading, I just wasn't sure that I could do it. And so I had the fear. But then, very sadly, a friend of mine from school died very suddenly. She had a brain aneurysm, and basically she had a headache on the Thursday, and by the Sunday she was dead. And it just made me realise that life's short. And I thought, I can't keep off. If I want to fulfil this lifetime ambition, I need to just bite the bullet, write the novel, send it out, and see what happens. And so that was 13 years ago, and now I have many novels published. So it was worth getting over the fear and starting.
Oh, we're certainly glad you did. David, how about you? How did you become an author?
I enjoyed it when I was at school. I thought I was quite good, but I never considered it to be a career. It was only when I had a business in London before the credit crunch, if you remember, back 10, 12 years ago, which I lost.
Yeah.
And I then that was a very difficult time for me. I nearly lost the house and nearly had to declare bankruptcy. It was a very difficult time. I spent the next 5 or so years trying to work out what to do next. I was in recruitment, and there was no demand for recruitment, and I couldn't go back to, even when the market picked up, I couldn't go back to it. It just wasn't me anymore. So I spent a number of years doing different things, which some worked out, some didn't work out. I've always been quite creative at that point from a business perspective. I think I started writing just to give me something to do that wasn't work. And I started to write short stories. I entered them for various competitions, didn't get anywhere. But what I found was that I could write, and I quite liked what I'd written, even if other people didn't like what I'd written. And the first short story I wrote became the first book I wrote, which has nothing to do with what I do now. That was comedy. And so I wrote a book which I was surprised that I could do, and I was actually quite pleased with what I'd written. I put it on Amazon, self-published, didn't sell. I think I sold 5 books in the first month, something stupid. But I didn't stop. I thought I still liked what I'd written, and I got some good feedback from certain people, which encouraged me to keep going. So I then wrote another 13 comedy books over the next 3 or 4 years, none of which really sold, but I enjoyed doing it, and I got good feedback, and I was selling more. I might not have been selling a huge amount, but I was selling enough to make it worthwhile from a financial perspective. But it was when I'd written, I was getting frustrated because I wasn't selling, and I was working so hard, creating so much content, still thinking I was coming up with some good stuff, but it just wasn't selling. So I came to the conclusion I had to change tack. I had to change what I was doing. So I thought, I've got no idea how I'm going to do it, if I can even do it, but I'm going to have a go at writing a crime fiction novel. So I did a bit of research. I read a few people's books, some of the more popular books out there, and I thought to myself, I can do this. It's not beyond my capability. So I had a go, and as you heard, I wrote this one, the Broadland one, and it took me about 9 months, give or take. The thinking, that the construction of it was the hardest bit, because obviously it's much more complicated than a bog standard comedy book, which is just a bit of a laugh. And I put it on Amazon, and I remember my family was out in Japan at the time, and I was watching the sales ticking over by day, and I remember writing little emails to the family saying, I'm currently ranked 2,000 in the UK. This is really good for me. And then the next day, I'm currently ranked 1,000 in the UK. This is really good. And it was like, I'm ranked 500 in the UK. And it just kept going up and up and up. And it hit, I think, 24 in the UK. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe this. I'm finally making some money from what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. And it just all came together from there. And then I cracked on with the next 4. And it's all been good.
Brilliant. And Stuart, how did you, obviously a different background, how did you decide that you were going to write your first book?
Yeah, it's very, very different from me. I've always been interested in reading true crime and crime fiction for many years. When I left the police, there were lots of people kind of nudging me and saying, why don't you write a crime novel? Because you must have got lots of experiences and things that you could include maybe in a book. Why don't you write one? And I thought about it for not that long, in fairness, and it was actually a meeting with my co-author, Stephen Wade, about 4 or 5 years ago. We'd been at a literature festival, and I'd been chairing a panel of crime writers, and Stephen was one of those writers. And we were having a coffee afterwards, and it was literally just a casual conversation. How about if we kind of combine our knowledge and experience and put a book together where we go back to the 1800s and the early 1900s and talk about the crimes that happened then and how criminals behaved and detectives worked, and maybe bring it right up to date. And that was really how the Crime Writers Casebook came about. Obviously, once we'd written that, fortunately, it was quite successful. People liked it, so then the pressure became a little bit to bear from the publishers to say, well, are you going to write another one? And that's where being a detective came in. So, of course, you can imagine now there is, even though this world is very different at the moment, somewhat of a bit more pressure. Is that it? Have you finished now, or are you going to write some more? Who knows? There might be something in the future.
So when you are constructing a novel, or a fiction or non-fiction, what kind of things do you have to think about first? Callie?
Wow. What do I think about first? For me, an idea can come in several different ways. So I might start off with thinking, what if? So with strangers, it was, what if a group of people who don't know each other all get wrapped up in the same crime. So I'll always start with a what if idea, and then I'll start brainstorming. So I love stationery. Any excuse to get some new stationery. I'll get some new books, pens, make spider diagrams. I ask a lot of why questions. So if I come up with my characters, for example, Ursula in Strangers is a kleptomaniac. So I'd say why? Why is she a kleptomaniac? People don't just become them. Something traumatic happens that prompts that. And then I'll move further and further back in the process, so I start to know all of my characters' backstory. And then I work out the goal, what it is that they want to achieve in the novel. So in Strangers, my character Ursula wants to discover what her landlord is keeping in his locked basement. With Alice, my other character, who's a divorced 46-year-old woman, she goes on an internet date and then starts getting stalked. So for her, the goal is find out who her stalker is. And then with Gareth, my third character, he lives with his mum who's got dementia. And 20 years earlier, his dad went missing when he went hiking on Scarfield Pike. But some postcards start to arrive to his mum saying, "I love you, John." Now his dad's supposed to be dead. So for him, he has to discover who is sending these postcards. So once I've got all of these things and I've worked out what the overarching crime is, which is how the novel starts, I have a massive whiteboard here in my office, just down here, and I use the 4-act structure. I use this brilliant book called Stealing Hollywood by Alexandra Sokolov, which explains all about how you can use film structure to write really pacey, gripping novels. So I split my board into the 4 acts, which is then 8 sequences, and I work out what the 8 sequence climaxes are. So these are the kind of really exciting points in the book, the sort of bits that get the reader talking and turning the pages. And once I've got that, I'll plot out a few scenes. I have a rough idea of where it's going, but I leave enough space when I'm writing to let the characters evolve, because sometimes as you get to know your characters when you write them, they don't necessarily want to do what you've plotted, but you have to kind of go along with how they evolve, because if you force them into the plot, it starts to feel very false. So I have a kind of a roadmap to follow as I write, but also lots and lots of gaps where I'll be sitting going, okay, now what happens, but I've tried all kinds of different ways of writing a novel. I've tried pantsing it, where you just literally sit down and write. That was terrible for me. I had to rewrite that book so many times, but I know it works for a lot of authors. I've tried outlining, because I read that James Patterson outlines and finds it a very quick way to write a book afterwards. I found it took all the magic out of writing for me, because I felt like I'd written the book once by writing the outline. I've used the 3-act structure, which is very similar to the 4-act structure, and I've used the hero's journey. I used that for my first ever book, which is very helpful actually if you kind of feel like you need your hand holding when writing a book. But as I saw David said in the little sort of preview to this chat, it's different for every author, and I would never prescribe this is the way you write a book. You've just got to find the way that works for you.
Yeah, and David?
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. It's got to be something that's unique to everyone. I think the most important thing to do is have a go, because you just don't know until you try. And I think a lot of people are sitting there thinking, I'd love to write a book. I've got the time now, obviously. But they don't believe that they can write the book, and I think it's that self-belief that is probably lacking in most people, that they can actually do it. And I would definitely say to anyone who's thinking about it, just have a go, because you just don't know what can happen. For me, slightly different in that I think I approach it from a much more I haven't read any of that stuff. I don't know any of that 3-act thing. I've got no idea what that's all about. I just come up with the story. I think I come up with the end first. I mean, for example, this first one I wrote, I knew I wanted it to be set in Norfolk, and I knew I wanted my character to live on a boat. And then I thought, well, look, if it's going to be in Norfolk, it's got to feature a windmill, because that's what Norfolk's famous for. So something's got to happen in that windmill. That's got to be pretty horrific, and that was at the end. So I started at the end. I came up with that idea as to what would happen, and then basically worked my way backwards, and came up with the story in that way. I knew that it had to be dramatic, because I kind of worked out from reading other people's books that it's about the drama. It's got to be, it's got to have that drama in it, else it's going to fall flat. It's got to have action. It's got to have a really good murder mystery thing going on, obviously. It's got to have lots of twists and turns, obviously. I say obviously, but authors seem to stick it up on their description that this has got a massive twist at the end. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's got to be obvious for this sort of thing. And when I started writing it, I spent 4 years writing comedy, and I was determined not to write comedy again. So I started writing it's got to be really serious and really, really heavy. And within the first couple of chapters, I realized it's not going to work. It's got to have some sort of comedy in it, because that's what I do. That's what I have done. But also it keeps it light. When you're dealing with heavy subjects, it's sometimes important just to make a joke occasionally, just to make it a bit more real. Because I'm sure that policemen out there, I could ask my colleague, but they have a bit of a laugh sometimes. It's not just, oh my God, this is really serious. They have a bit of a laugh, and I've brought that into my books. And then I also wanted to bring in a little bit of romance, just a tiny bit, just to make it, again, a bit more real. Because obviously male, female characters are going to get to know each other, and there's going to be some stuff like that going on. So I thought that is important. But actual constructing it, I would say I start at the end, and then I come up with and motive. I have to say motive, because I've read so many books and seen so many things on TV where the guy at the end has got such a thin motive for what he's done or what she's done. I'm thinking, seriously, what, you spilt my pint, I'm going to kill you? There's not enough motive there. So I was very keen on having some serious motive going on. And then I come up with a basic synopsis that I develop into a chapter plan. And the chapter plan forms my basic book. And from that, I start writing. And I keep going back to the chapter plan all the time, developing it as I go. As was said before, the characters speak for themselves, and you have to let them help write the story for you, because they know what they want to happen, and you have to listen to what they say. It doesn't matter what you want them to do; they're not going to want to do it, and so you have to let that creativity change the structure of the story. So it can't be too fixed, but it has to be. You have to have some sort of a plan. If you pants it, then it doesn't work. You have to have some sort of plan, a structure as to what's going to happen and when, and then just crack on, allowing yourself to be creative during that process.
And Stuart, for you, obviously slightly different again. You've co-authored with Stephen Wade, who is the crime historian. So how does that work on planning what you're going to write? And obviously you both write different sides. You're more procedural and he's historian. So how did it work in planning your first book together and your second?
Yeah, just to endorse what David said there about humour in the police. It's known as gallows humour, and it's basically a coping mechanism, because obviously some of the experiences that you go through, the things you see, are very difficult, and so it's really important that when people write their books, they have that little element of humour. Some people might look at it and think it's a little bit inappropriate, but it's actually the way that some people cope with situations, so it's important. What we wanted to do, myself and Stephen, was to try and write a book that wasn't just like literally a reference book that people could pick up that was full of information, but in a kind of dry way. So you'd be looking and hunting for the information. So we had lots and lots of conversations about how far back. Stephen's got the biggest challenge in my view, because he goes from something like 1600 right through to the early 1900s. So he's got a massive time span to cover, and obviously he can't cover all of that. So he chose some relevant parts of history to put in where crime was particularly relevant. Mine was a little bit easier in terms of I went from about 1980 when I originally joined the police up to modern day, so I could talk about the differences and the massive differences from when I joined, when there was nothing like DNA. It was in its early stages. You know, it was literally a different world. And of course, investigation now is very much digital. It's very much the here and now, and it's all to do with computers and things like that. So it's changed. When I first joined, we didn't have mobile phones. I remember I got my first pager when I was working in CID, and it was like a Christmas present. And once I'd worked out how to use it and to stop it going off in the middle of a courtroom, things became a little bit easier for me. But yeah, it's quite a challenge. But I think hopefully what we really wanted to do was make it really interesting. So we've put personal experiences in there, certainly from my point of view, and we put a lot of case studies, so that, you know, when we talk about a subject such as what happens when you get arrested, exactly what happens to you when you go before the custody sergeant, what is the process. You know, I've put some experiences in there as well, and some case studies for context, because I think it's just, you need to make it quite light reading, because it is a very heavy and a very serious subject.
Yeah. Going on to the subject of research, and again, you're going to come at it from different angles, and I know that Kelly and Stuart have worked together on some of Kelly's books. So when it comes to research, how much do you need to do? What kind of support do you seek out to help you make sure that you're accurate? You know, what's your process, Kelly?
Yeah, well, I am very lucky to have Stuart helping me out with my books. I've actually changed the method that I work with him. When I first started using Stuart for police procedural advice, I would send him a list of questions before I even wrote a word of the book. But actually that didn't turn out to be the most efficient use of either of our time, because as David and I have discussed, often things change as you write the book. So some of the questions that I may have asked Stuart before I started it no longer became relevant as I got into the book. So what I do now is, if I know that I'm approaching a police procedural part of the book, and I know it's coming up in a few chapters, I'll send Stuart an email and I'll say, okay, I've got a character who's about to get interviewed in a police station. For example, this happens to Gareth in Strangers. You know, what would they say when they turn up at his door? He's not being arrested, but he's being interviewed about a crime. What terminology would they use? What would they say when they actually took him to the station? You know, all of this kind of thing. And Stuart's really good at getting back to me and telling me exactly what they would say. And then when I've actually finished the book, I cut out all of the police procedural chapters and scenes, and then I send them to Stuart and ask for his feedback. I thought it was quite funny, actually. In Strangers, there was a female police officer who was talking to one of my characters, and Stuart's feedback was, I think she's a bit harsh here. So I had to tone her down a little bit, because I think I was being a bit hard on the police, thinking that, you know, she needed to show a bit more of a sort of sensitive side. But, you know, it's that kind of comment that's really invaluable to research, because, you know, you can tell when authors and even TV programs are kind of making it up, and some ex-police that I know will all be up in arms on social media going, no one talks like that, no one says, you know, whatever it is. So it is really important to get advice from somebody, you know, whether it's Stuart, who does it professionally, or, you know, a friend of a friend who's in the police, who can answer your questions. But yeah, don't assume that, you know, just because you've watched a lot of episodes of The Bill or Line of Duty, that's an accurate portrayal of the police. Actually speak to someone who is in the police or was in the police.
Hi Sam, it's Stuart. Can you hear me all right?
Stuart, yeah, we can hear you, but your screen has frozen. I've just messaged our technical whiz kid, Kaz, to see if she can sort you out.
If it's all right
But
with
we
you,
can
I'll
still hear you,
log back on
Stuart.
again. Is that okay?
Fantastic. And while you're doing that, we'll go to David and ask about research.
Research, right? Okay. I think there are two sides to the research. It's researching the story, I guess, what you want to happen, and then there's the police procedural bit, which is the more complicated bit, I guess. For the first bit, I write about Norfolk, it's in particular the Norfolk Broads. So it's all about the waterways and the river systems and the locations. And for that, the reason I wanted to write in Norfolk was because I spent a lot of time there. I'm a keen sailor. I like boating. I like spending time on water. And for me, that was the Norfolk Broads had to be the central part of the story, because it's for me, it's such a great location. And I wanted it to be very, very central. So my stories had to be based around Norfolk. And so the actual researching of that wasn't too difficult, because I spent such a lot of time there anyway, boating and sailing and mucking about on the water and stuff. That was already there. So that was in my head. When I'm writing a story, I use Google a lot. Obviously, I'm sure we all do. Google massively. What happens. I use Google Maps to put myself in place I haven't actually been to, and that is just brilliant to take yourself into an actual street and think, right, okay, this is going to happen here. And then the other for the actual police procedural bit, to be honest, if I can't find the answer on Google, then I'm on UK Crime Book Club posting a question, because I get such excellent feedback. It's amazing. I just everyone's coming back at me with all these brilliant answers, and that's it. It's just it's the UK Crime Book Club is an amazing resource. 10,000 members. Some of them are actually, as here, have worked in the police force for years and years and years, and they know the answers. So that is a great resource in itself.
Brilliant. Loving the mention. Thank you very much. Stuart, now research obviously quite different for you when it comes to constructing a novel. You're the one giving the advice, but do you ever, as well as that, do you ever have to go back and update now that you're retired from the police? Do you have to keep updating your skills and your knowledge as well?
Yes, very much so. I think that's really important, because the police service, along with other organisations, moves so quickly. And one of the things that I do when I advise people about using the name of a unit or a particular department in a police force is that the police likes to reinvent the wheel. The police service is famous for doing something many years ago, then doing lots of other things, and then going back to what they did many years ago. It's just a well-known kind of way that they operate. So I do have to keep myself very much up to date. Otherwise, I'm going to be giving people something I don't want to do, which is obviously incorrect advice. So I've got lots of online resources. I use the books that are used for officers when they study for promotion, which are just rammed full of the legal information and some of the procedure as well. So although investigating a murder, for example, probably hasn't changed that much since I left the force, the structures and the strategies are very much the same. Other things have changed because they've had to. So yeah, it's absolutely very important that I keep up to speed with what's going on in the service, so that I can be confident that the advice I give to writers is actually the right advice.
Yeah. The biggest challenges facing authors when you're writing about a murder investigation, what do you find the hardest part of that, Kelly?
I don't really have the police play active roles in my book. In my books, the characters are normal people who happen to get themselves caught up in a crime. So I don't have any forensic detail. I don't have any investigations. I actually try and keep the police out of my books as much as possible, because I don't necessarily want the crimes that my main characters are experiencing to be solved, because then that would lose.
When you are constructing that,
Hmm.
how do you know what to kind of put into, not for necessarily a police investigation, but for you writing all the details of what's happening? So as you're planning your murder, how do you know? Yeah, as you're planning your murder, how do you know what details, what your characters are going to do, what you're going to show, obviously, and what you're going to kind of withhold a bit?
Okay, so Strangers actually starts with the aftermath of the crime. So we've got our three main characters standing around a dead body, and that is the central question in the novel. So the readers are the question that is immediately in the reader's mind is, who is the dead body and what has happened? So rather than immediately answer that, which obviously would just make the book extremely short, I then go back in time a week to when all the characters' lives are separate and they are all strangers. And then the mysteries that each of the characters have to solve that I mentioned earlier about, like the locked basement door and the letters from the dead dad and the stalker. So you follow those three mysteries while still having that central mystery in the back of your head. Who did they kill someone? What happened? But as well as that, there is another mystery running through the book, which is about the Harborside Murderer. So in Bristol here, we have the River Avon running through the centre of the city. And unfortunately, very sadly, people lose their lives by falling into the river. At least half a dozen a year. It's normally in the very early hours of the morning, and everybody assumes that the people that fall in are drunk. They've just come out of a bar or club. But there is a social media rumour, as there are for a lot of cities that have a river running through, that there's a pusher. And I thought that would be quite interesting to put into Strangers as part of the plot. Is somebody murdering people by pushing them into the river or not? So now we have 5 mysteries all going along in the same book. And it's managing the pace of the reveals of those mysteries. You need to keep feeding the reader a little bit extra detail, a little bit more of a hint, so they can start to sort of formulate what they think the answer is, what they think is actually going on. And that sort of thing, I think you can only really get right by studying books that, fiction novels that you think are very good at keeping you gripped, and keep the tension high. I always say to aspiring writers, take your favorite book, read it just for the love of reading it, and then read it with an analytical eye. How did that reader make you keep turning the pages? Why did you stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning because you couldn't put it down? You can identify what it is that author is using or doing. You can use similar kind of devices in your book. Like, I'm a big fan of a cliffhanger. I love leaving a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter so that the reader just has to keep turning the pages. But it's all practice. I mean, Strangers is my 7th book. And people tell me I'm getting better, which is nice. But it's all down to practice and trying different things in your books and seeing what works and what doesn't.
David, how about you?
I think practice is key. You have to. It's very difficult to know. You can read other people's books and use them as a guide as to what works, what made you turn the page. But I think when you're actually writing the story for yourself, I think the most important thing to do is to put yourself in that position. Whatever's happening, you need to be able to put yourself in that character's mind at that particular time, sees what he sees or what she sees, hears what he or she hears, and go from there. I think that's probably the hardest bit, because that means you've actually got to You've got to see the whole thing happening in your head from start to finish. And that, for me, it can be very difficult because it's such a creative challenge to immerse yourself to that extent that you're thinking how the character's thinking at that particular time and how everything's interacting at that particular time, and then bringing in the actual plot and the subject matter and what's happened before and what's going to happen next. And you often find yourself having to stop and look back at what you've written and make sure that everything's fitting in. I'm often putting little asterisks. I don't write notes, but I stick an asterisk in a bit which I know is something's dodgy about what I've just written because it doesn't relate to something I've written before. And I think, look, I'll just sort that out when I finish the first draft, and then I'll just. And I'm always worried at the end of the book that I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to be rubbish because I've just missed out so much stuff that doesn't make sense. Some of it's not going to tie up, and it's going to take me months to fix. But it doesn't. I'm always surprised at how relatively easy it is to put all the dots in order and make sure all the T's are crossed with regard to the plot. But I think that I think the answer is, from my perspective, is to put yourself in the position of the characters, and if you present a problem for the character to solve, the detective inspector to solve, or whoever it is to solve, once you present the problem, you've then got to work out a way to resolve it, and that's the story. You've got that's why I started at the end. You've got this crime, and you've got to resolve it, and that's by giving yourself that challenge, and that happens all the time. You just had this great idea for plot, and you stuck it in the story, and you think, oh God, now I've got to resolve that. And that's the fun of it, because now I've got a challenge here. I've got to resolve this problem. And again, you've got to delve yourself into the character's mind and solve it. And that's part of the fun. So a bit of creativity, a bit of putting yourself in the position of the character.
Yeah. Stuart, slightly different variation on the question for you. How did you cope with the changes when you moved from a rural part of the country after working in London for many years?
I did okay, I think, hopefully. There were one or two people who moved with me who went straight back in the opposite direction again because they couldn't cope. Because I was working in London for quite a few years, and the first few years were in uniform, whizzing around the capital, dealing with lots of different crimes and incidents. But then I became a detective, so I was probably more of a reactive officer then, reacting to crimes that had happened and investigating them. So when I transferred to the East Midlands and a rural county in Lincolnshire, things were very different. The procedures were very different. And I thought everything would be pretty sweet because I was hopefully going to be a detective there. But when I arrived on my first day, I was told in no uncertain terms that I was going to be working in uniform, and I had to get myself up to the stores to get a new uniform. So I was working in uniform in a new force, and within the first 6 months, they decided to temporarily promote me, which was a bit of a shock to the system as well. So for me, it wasn't too bad. It was, I think, had I not been a detective in London and had I been working in uniform and then moving to a much quieter part of the country, I probably would have struggled a bit more. But I think because I'd been reacting to crimes, that the change wasn't quite so bad. And it didn't take me too long to get my head around things. Although processes and procedures can be a little bit different, policing in general is very much similar across the country. So I think I kind of did all right, but it took me a little while to settle in, it's fair to say.
My favourite question to ask authors is memorable moments. What have been the most memorable moments for you as an author? Kelly?
Oh God!
I know you've had some big ones in the last year.
I know. There's been so many. You know, I'm very lucky to have experienced seeing the tube posters for Sleep in London all around the underground was amazing last year. First time that had ever happened. Only took me 10 years to get a tube poster. So that was really nice. Also last year, Sleep was selected for Richard and Judy's book club. So I got to meet Richard and Judy themselves, which was very surreal. I'd been watching This Morning back when I was a student up in Newcastle. And so to actually meet them in person and to hear them talking about one of my books, because they had actually read it, was wonderful. And the other surreal thing that happened last year was I went on the Sarah Cox show on ITV, and Ross Kemp, Grant Mitchell from EastEnders, one of the guests, and he was sitting on the couch. And I was a bit like, oh my God, because equally I've been watching EastEnders since the beginning. That's how old I am. So I just went up to him and I put my hand out and I said, hi, I'm Callie, I'm the author. And he looked at me and he went, yeah, I know. And I was a bit like, Ross Kemp knows who I am. And then Ricky Wilson from the Kaiser Chiefs sitting on the other side of me. It was last year was a very unusual and surreal year in my life. And now this year I'm basically spending most of my time in pajamas with no makeup on, schlepping around the house. So, from one year to another.
Quite different. David, how about you for memorable moments as an author?
Oh, I've had nothing like that, I'm afraid. I think the most memorable moment was when I actually started selling books. Having been not selling for 4 years, to suddenly see the sales going up was great, and I'll never forget that, because that was quite an emotional time, because having tried to do something for such a long time and getting nowhere, that was huge, because that meant, and also getting the feedback from people saying how good they thought my work was and how much they enjoyed it, and still to this day to get emails from people from around the world. I got one from Florida yesterday, and it's just weird to get someone from Florida saying, I love your books, please keep writing. I think the only other memorable moment I can think of is getting a call from a major publisher one day, asking if saying that they'd like to represent me, and then for me to turn them down because I didn't think their offer was very good. So that was a bit odd, because I thought
good for you.
That was my dream to be published. I thought that would be amazing, but I'd already become successful by that time, and I knew what I was doing, and I could do everything. I felt I could do everything: the marketing, the book cover design, the editing. I worked all out. I spent 4 years working all that stuff out. So to actually get a call then, when I'd already become, I was already doing well, was for me a complete anticlimax, because I thought, well, look, what you guys are offering me, I've learned to do myself. So, the only thing I'm going to do is give you 20% of my income, whatever it was. So it wasn't. And I thought about it. I thought about it for a long time, but I eventually said no. And I thought it was a memorable moment, because I thought I have achieved a lot. I've learned so much myself. I didn't say at the beginning that when I wrote my first book, the comedy book, I did send it off to stacks and stacks of literary agents trying to get some sort of a deal going, because I thought that was the only way to do it. And I got stacks and stacks of rejection letters, thinking, oh my God, this is just horrendous. I think I sent it to about 70 people, and I got about 35 responses back saying no thanks.
Wow.
And that made me sit down and think, well, I've got to learn how to do this myself, because I'm not going to quit. So getting that offer so late was just too little, too late. So that was a memorable bit, maybe not in a good way, but I think the most memorable thing was the sales, and getting emails from people around the world saying they've read my book, they love it, that sort of thing.
Stuart, how about for you? Any memorable moments?
I think holding a copy of your first book is quite a special moment. But for me, one that I will never forget was only last year. I was originally brought up in the Northeast. I was born in Gateshead, and I went to school there. And I moved away when I was 16 to join the police in London. And I have still got family up there. So for me, going back there in October last year to talk about my journey, not only in the police, but being involved with these books now, having family present at the local library where I used to hang out as a kid, was pretty special, pretty emotional as well, because there are members of the family who are no longer able to be present there. But it was such a wonderful occasion to just be able to go back where I still consider to be home, talk about what I've done in the last few years, or quite a few years, and just say, you know, just see a few old friends and faces and a familiar building. It was really special.
And we've got a question from one of the, we've not really got to member questions yet, but we've got a question. How do you cope with marketing, and do you enjoy the selling process? Which I'd like to know about social media as well, and your thoughts on whether it's useful. So Callie, do you want to start us off on the marketing process?
Yeah, well, for me, it's very different than it is for David, because obviously David is self-published, so he has to do all of his own marketing and selling. Because I'm traditionally published, I have a marketing team that does all of that on my behalf, and a publicist who gets me radio slots and that sort of thing, and a sales team who will try and get my books into the supermarkets and that sort of thing. That's not to say I don't do anything myself. And you know, with the lockdown, actually my publicist has been furloughed, so I've basically had to do my own publicity for the last 3 weeks, something like that. So yeah, I just keep on top of my social media, really, because the most important thing for me is to make connections with my readers. And like David, I get lots of lovely emails, and also tweets and Facebook messages. I've got an Instagram account. I've even got a YouTube account, which I do neglect a bit, but you know, I've got some stuff on there. And I do try to answer every message that I get, which can be a bit of a challenge some days, and particularly at the moment when my writing time is so scarce with the homeschooling and everything else that I'm having to do. But I do try to reply to every single message, and I think it's important to. I try to give my readers a bit of an insight into my day and into my process. So on Instagram, for example, I'm posting my I'm trying to see if I've got one here. Posting my daily word count, like a picture of me holding my daily word count, or you know, telling them what I'm up to. So yeah, social media takes a lot of my time, but I think without the kind of feedback that you get from readers, you'd be writing in a bit of a vacuum. And I know some writers like that, and they don't do any social media. But for me, knowing that readers are enjoying my books and hearing that they're recommending it to their friends and family and that sort of thing is a hugely fulfilling part of the job.
And David, how about you?
Right, I'm very fortunate in that I come from a marketing background. I did business studies at university, which marketing was a large part of that, and I've had my various businesses in the past. So I kind of always known what I was doing with that. But I think, without going into detail about, you know, you're having the social media and having an email database and that sort of thing, I think the most important thing for a writer to do is to keep writing and to keep publishing books that are really, really good. The most important aspect of marketing is word of mouth. If you write a good book and you get it out there and people start reading it, then they're going to tell their friends. And that is the most, like, beyond anything else, that's the most important aspect. So the most important thing to do is write a book. The second most important thing to do, I would say, is if you're not, I mean, obviously you're published, but if you're not published, is to get a good cover. Think about the cover, because unfortunately, you know, it's not going to work. If you have a bad cover, it's just not going to sell. It's just one of those things that people look at it and go, "Oh, that's rubbish," and they'll move on. So that's important. If you're sitting there as a potential author thinking about writing a book, I don't think you need to get too hung up on the aspects of marketing. It's a part of it, but it's not the be all and end all. The most important part is to write the book and make the book as good as possible and to have a good cover. because everything else is kind of just, well, you work it out, you stick it on Amazon. You've got to write a good, you've got to write a good, what are they called? The bit at the front, the blurb. That's got to be catchy. But if you're a writer, really, you should be able to do that because you're a writer. So, that's what you do. So you've got to read other people's blurb and see what works and what doesn't work and come up with your own. That's got to be that's important. The stuff behind when you actually upload the book onto Amazon, the keywords, that's important to think about keywords you're looking for. Again, look at what other people are doing, what's selling. When think about how someone would search for a book on Amazon, the keywords they'd use to find that book. And again, look at those, and there are various tools that you can buy to help you sort of fine-tune what those keywords are. That's important. Try and get keywords into your headings without being silly. So the title of the book, I can't remember what mine is, but it's got some keywords in there. I can't remember what it is, but there's keywords stuck in there somewhere in a subtle sort of a way without going silly. And then I think replying to people. If anyone sends you a message, whatever it is, however small, you have to reply. You have to keep in contact with people. That's important. I know I should do more, a lot more. You can't do too much. But for me, the most important thing of my day is my word count. I've got to sit down every day, no matter what happens, and try and do my word count. Because that's what, writers write. At the end of the day, writers write. If you're a writer and you're not writing, you're not a writer. Sorry. But you've got to write. So that's it. That's the most important part of my day is to write as much as I possibly can. Everything else.
Brilliant. Thank you, David.
Okay, that's it.
And Stuart, how do you find the marketing side?
Well, it's a bit different for me. Very different. We've got a very small publishing team, extremely small, behind us. So a lot of what we do, I tend to do it, and Stephen does it as well. So social media is big for us. It's massive. I wouldn't say I wasn't a fan, but I wasn't confident in using some of these social media platforms before. But I've found that I've had to get myself into the 21st century, kicking and screaming, to find out a bit more about Twitter and Facebook and whatever else there is out there, because there are so many people that are using it, and it's such a good way of engaging with people. And one message that you put out there can be, shared across the world in a matter of seconds. So you really do need to get engaged with it. And there are so many wonderful people out there that can help you. So you build up contact, word of mouth, recommendation. If someone buys the book and they like it, they put it on a social media platform, people will read it and they may well buy it. So I think social media for us is probably one of the biggest, and even more so now that we can't get out and about and be involved in events at the moment. So
yeah,
that's very important.
I know we've had some fun learning together this week, Stuart.
We certainly have.
Getting used to technology together. Finally, we're coming up on the end of our panel now. So thank you for all joining us. What I'd like to finish with, if I may, is asking you all to just give yourselves the final plug of your latest book. And briefly, if you could, just tell us what's next for you. Kelly.
Okay, so Plug for Strangers, which you can get for £5 in Asda and Tesco. It's on the hardback. It's even got my signature embossed on the front. Or if you prefer an ebook, it's 99p in the May Kindle sale at the moment. I'm currently working on my next book, my 8th psychological thriller, which is about 3 women. It's partly set in Gozo, an island off the coast of Malta, partly set in London, partly set in Wales. I don't want to say any more about it than that because I don't like talking about my books when I'm writing them. And I have got, I've also written young adult thrillers, and my next young adult thriller is called The Island, about a group of teenagers who get marooned on a Thai island and then all their worst phobias come true. And that is out in January.
Brilliant. Thank you. David, your latest book, please, and what's coming up for you next?
Yeah, the latest one, this one. It's called 3 Rivers. It's the fourth in the Diatana series. It's again set in Norfolk Broads. It's got a bit of comedy, a bit of humour, a bit of romance, lot of twists and turns, a lot of drama, a lot of action, and it's fundamentally about, well, it leads up to the. I shouldn't even tell you that, actually. No, I can't even tell you that. The title reveals itself.
No spoilers, no spoilers.
And the next one I'm writing is called Horsey Mere, which is a small broad, again in the Norfolk Broads, and it's about the body of a witch is found from the 17th century, and it's about that. Same sort of stuff, really, and that's it.
Brilliant, thank you. Stuart, show us your books and what's next for the Gib Consultancy.
This is Being a Detective. This came out last year. Slightly different from the first book. It's an A to Z of lots of different things to do with the role of a detective. So there's bits in here about Sherlock Holmes and Dickens and lots of people many years ago and centuries ago. But also there's things in here about cybercrime, all sorts of things that happen nowadays. Modern technology and what the detective role is all about. So that's the latest book. I'm writing at the moment, pretty much, and we're hopeful that we'll have an announcement to make in the next couple of months, which is a very exciting project, which will hopefully build and develop on what we've managed to achieve so far. So keep your eyes peeled.
Thank you so much to you all for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Anybody who wants to welcome. Anybody who wants to follow the rest of the events for this festival weekend can follow the hashtag UKCBC Fest 20. And now I'm going to go off to one side off camera, and like I said, I've had a fangirl moment for the last hour, so I'm going to go and scream for a while. Thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to reading more from you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam.